Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the glittering heart of 18th century France. You're not just watching history, you're stepping right into the golden halls of Versailles, where chandeliers drip crystal, powdered wigs defy gravity, and one man's dinner involves more ceremony than most people's weddings. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where people are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the Hall of Mirrors. It's early evening, the sun's last light glancing off 357 mirrored panels, and you're surrounded by silk, brocade, and people who haven't touched a doorknob in years. The air smells like beeswax and heavily perfumed nobles. Plus, just a hint of roasted meat drifting in from the kitchens, several football fields away. You, dear guest, have been granted the dubious honor of witnessing what is arguably the least efficient way to eat dinner in human history. You probably won't survive this. Not from poison or intrigue, though those are on the table too, but from sheer, unrelenting formality. This isn't grab a plate and dig in. No. You'll be expected to bow 3 times before dessert. You trudge behind a minor nobleman whose perfume enters the room 2 seconds before he does. Your shoes, polished within an inch of their lives, slide silently across the marble as you pass through endless corridors toward the grand couvert, the royal supper ritual, where the king eats publicly. Because why not turn dinner into a spectator sport? You find your place at the edge of the dining area, among dozens of others. Only a few will sit. Most will stand, some for hours, just to catch a glimpse of the king chewing. Nobles jostle subtly for position. It's Versailles, so everything is theater. And tonight's performance stars bread, butter, and 27 mind-bending courses. The room glows. Hundreds of candles flicker in golden candelabras, casting warm halos on the ornate walls and ceiling murals of cherubs who are frankly judging you. It's hot. Not because of weather, but from sheer candle power. And behind those glimmering walls, a kitchen staff of 200 scrambling like caffeinated ants. Let's talk about logistics for a sec. Dinner doesn't just happen. At Versailles, feeding the king was a full-blown military operation. Every ingredient had to be pre-approved. Every spoon had a designated holder. Even the exact number of bread rolls, tracked. Historians still argue whether these meals were primarily political theater or genuine culinary indulgence. Maybe both. But what's clear, nothing was simple. As you glance to your left, you spot 2 men arguing over a footstool. A footstool. That's because proximity equals power. Sit close to the king, and suddenly, your cousin's land dispute in Burgundy gets fast-tracked. Sit too far? Enjoy peasant tier invisibility. Then, the trumpet sound. A ripple moves through the room. You stiffen, trying not to trip over your own dignity. The king approaches. Louis XV, tight curls, a faint smile, layers of velvet, enters flanked by guards and servants. He glides to his place at the head of the long table, which gleams like a still pond of silverware and folded napkins shaped like swans. Everyone bows, some twice. You do a solid 3 just to be safe. Your knees crack a little, but nobody notices over the rustle of satin and the clink of ceremonial swords. Now begins the true absurdity. A servant steps forward with a ceremonial napkin. Not just any cloth, of course. It's monogrammed linen, softened with milk and pressed under marble. The king accepts it with a nod. Another servant immediately pours rose water from a gilded pitcher onto the king's hands. 2 more hold bowls beneath. A 5th stands by with towels. This is just hand washing, and it takes 5 people and a small engineering degree. And you're already getting hungry. The scent of roasted pheasant is playing tricks on your brain, but don't expect to eat. You are, after all, just here to watch. There's a murmur nearby as someone recognizes a new arrival, one of the Duke's mistresses. Her gown is so wide it brushes both sides of the doorway at once. She smiles like she owns the floor, and probably does, emotionally. The man next to you whispers that she once had a swan roasted inside a peacock and served with a tiny tiara. The footmen begin placing the first wave of platters on the table. But no one eats, yet. First, everything must be observed by the garde-manger, the royal food inspector, who is part detective, part snob. He sniffs each dish with theatrical suspicion, as if the soup might leap up and betray the crown. Meanwhile, musicians in the corner pluck away on lutes and violins, setting the mood, somewhere between refined and please don't faint from hunger. You can't help but marvel. This isn't a meal. It's an edible parade with costumes and a soundtrack. And yet, underneath the glitter, people still do weird, human things. You catch one noble sneakily wiping sweat from his forehead with his cuff. Another stifles a yawn. Across the room, a bored boy in a velvet coat quietly gnaws on a breadstick under the table, like a royal raccoon. Fun fact, forks were still slightly controversial. Sure, they were used, but some old-timers still preferred fingers for certain dishes, believing it made them look more virile. That's right, cutlery choices were gendered. You glance at the king. He hasn't touched a thing. He's waiting, as always, for the proper cue. A chamberlain steps forward and announces the opening of the meal. Finally, the king lifts his spoon. You're about to witness what happens when food, power, and pomp collide. And this is only the appetizer. The king's spoon moves, deliberately, precisely, as if he's conducting a silent symphony. And the entire court collectively shifts into gear. You can practically hear 200 stomachs sigh with longing. The first course has officially begun. But this isn't just a plate of food. No, this is what they call the service à la française. A sprawling, symmetrical display of multiple dishes arriving simultaneously, laid out like a savory battlefield across the royal table. Soups steaming, pastries gleaming, meats arranged with unnatural tidiness. None of that modern course-by-course pacing. It's all here, at once. Like a buffet you're not allowed to touch. And let's talk numbers. It's not unusual for the first service alone to include up to 20 individual dishes. You can spot turtle soup, beef tongue and aspic, veal kidneys, and a disturbingly jiggly dome of fish mousse. There's a pie that looks like it could house an entire squirrel, and may historically have done just that. The presentation is over the top, but deliberately so. This isn't just nourishment, it's power, wealth, and colonial conquest served on a platter. Right next to the soups, scented gloves. Yes, actual gloves, lightly perfumed, laid beside the silverware. Why? Because sometimes your hands smell like horse sweat and powdered wig glue. And nothing ruins a truffled pâté faster than eau de aristocrat elbow. Servants are in constant motion now, gliding silently, replacing goblets with ones that match the next wine, adding small silver bowls filled with lemons carved like tiny roses. No one ever touches the same spoon twice. That's how plagues start. Also etiquette. Historians still argue whether this level of ceremony made the food taste better or worse. Some claim the flavors were lost beneath all the spectacle. Others suggest the ritual was the flavor, the very excess adding its own seasoning. Either way, no one was here for just a meal. You came for the spectacle. The food just happened to be extremely butter-forward. You watch one particularly elegant servant present a dish of creamy quenelles with such reverence, it's as if he's handling the royal baby. He even bows slightly before setting it down. No one reacts. This is normal. By now, the air is dense with scent, saffron, meat glaze, something vaguely floral and terrifyingly expensive. You feel your own stomach starting to get a little rowdy, but you remain still. You're part of the background. A curious statue. If you even sniff too loudly, someone might challenge you to a duel. Or worse, scold you in iambic pentameter. As the king lifts a piece of partridge with his gold-handled fork, the rest of the table begins to follow, slowly, with utmost restraint. You're watching a group of people pretend they're not famished. They chew with the elegance of ballet dancers, and the facial control of poker champions. No one smacks. No one slurps. One wrong noise and you could be demoted to some distant rural post where dinners involve actual work. And remember, not everyone at the table is actually eating. Some nobles are simply here to be seen. They pick politely, arrange food on their plates like it's abstract art, and talk instead of chew. Speaking of talk, let's dive into the servant situation, because it's getting intense. There are dozens of them, some holding wine jugs, some fanning the room. One guy's entire job is to stand nearby in case someone drops a napkin. Another holds a small vial of vinegar in case a guest wants to refresh their palate mid-sip. That's right, vinegar, in tiny crystal, because apparently water wasn't dramatic enough. The king's personal taster already sampled everything in a separate, smaller chamber. And don't be fooled, that guy's job wasn't glamorous. Half the time he was testing for poison. If he dropped dead, well, c'est la vie, the king would switch to lentils. You spot something strange. A servant carefully heating a fork over a flame. Why? Because the king hates lukewarm bites. Each utensil must be exactly the right temperature, or someone's probably losing their job. Or worse, their invitation to the next masked ball. Now, let's talk quirky fact of the day. Those candles everywhere? They weren't just for lighting. The wax was often scented with everything from lavender to ambergris, a substance harvested from sperm whales and prized for its musky aroma. Yes, whale goo made its way to the dinner table, via the air. The king gestures subtly, and new dishes appear, as if summoned by his eyebrows. A roasted capon stuffed with foie gras and black truffle is carried in like it's made of glass. A servant nearby whispers to another that the bird cost more than his father's vineyard. And still, the table groans under the weight of food. You glance at the edges of the room, where lesser courtiers fidget quietly, watching every move. Some won't eat it all tonight. They'll simply linger in hopes of catching scraps later, or currying favor by pretending to find the whole event very spiritually nourishing. Suddenly someone sneezes. It's a sharp little thing. A quick, elegant chew from a marquis with an upturned nose and a powdered wig that looks like it houses bees. Everyone freezes. A fork pauses midair. The room holds its collective breath. Was that aimed toward the breadbasket? Luckily, a footman swoops in with superhuman speed, removes the entire affected platter, and replaces it as if nothing happened. Crisis narrowly averted. Then, the king smiles, barely, and resumes eating. Conversation begins to bloom again. At Versailles, it's not just what you say, but when. You must speak between bites, never mid-chew, and your topics must be elevated. Politics, art, theater, that thing Voltaire said that no one really understood but we're all pretending to. You know, dinners. Still, you catch little snippets. I hear the Duc de Chartres had 3 swans drowned in port wine. The new sugar loaves from Saint-Domingue are divine, darling. Madame de Pompadour says the king's pigeon pâté made him cry again. Normal conversation, obviously. By the time the first wave of dishes is being cleared, only about 40 minutes in, you realize this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And you're only just beginning to understand how many people, rules, and rituals it takes to serve one-man dinner. You're still standing, somehow. Though your knees are starting to feel like boiled turnips, and your stomach is growling loud enough to attract attention from the marble busts. But it's fine. Everything's fine. You're witnessing a royal dinner at Versailles. Technically history in motion. And hunger is just a detail. A deeply uncomfortable, slow-burning detail. Right now, something far more fascinating is happening. The meal pauses, not because the food's run out, don't be ridiculous, but because it's time for a round of social choreography, the highly delicate, mildly savage game of courtly seating. You shift your gaze to the table and notice a quiet, almost imperceptible tension rising among the nobles. They begin maneuvering, not physically, no, that would be too gauche, with subtle signals, a raised eyebrow, a whispered word, a slightly aggressive fan flick. It's all part of the ongoing status ballet that determines who gets to sit and where. At Versailles, a chair is never just a chair. It's a statement of proximity, power, and favor. At the center of this chaos sits the king, naturally. No one dares encroach too closely without permission. Around him, a halo of higher nobility with formal rights to sit, a right known as the privilege du tabouret, literally stool privilege. Yes, in this world, having a stool isn't just about resting your rear. It means you're so important you get to hover near royalty without breaking the standing-only rules that apply to, the regular elite. Historians still argue whether the obsession with seating reflected deeper political strategy or pure ego jousting. Probably both. Either way, people have fainted from holding their curtsies too long just to get noticed by a footstool. You watch as one duchess, clad in shimmering blue silk that rustles like wind in 1,000 guilder forest, slowly, ever so slightly nudges her chair 3 inches closer to the king's left. It's daring, it's theatrical, and it works. She lands herself in the conversational sweet zone, right as the king chuckles at some mild joke about a bishop's dancing ferret. Meanwhile, a marquis tries to make a similar move and is gently, silently thwarted by a servant who somehow appears behind him, ready with a polite correction. That seat, monsieur, is reserved. Translation, you don't rank. Back to the velvet rope with you. All this is happening in near silence. No shouting, no overt drama. Just that delicate, passive-aggressive grace only centuries of breeding and boredom can produce. Let's talk about the chairs themselves for a moment. They're not your IKEA folding variety. These are hand-carved, gilded, padded with imported fabrics, often Italian silk or damask, woven with the family crest. Each one has to match the aesthetic of the room, which is currently screaming Sun God Baroque in 40 different golden dialects. You could probably buy a small village with what's stuffed inside the king's armrest. Behind the seated elite stands the second layer of guests, the watchers. These people are technically nobles, but of lesser ranking. Think regional nobility, distant cousins, ambitious newcomers who manage to secure a pass to Versailles for the week. They don't sit, they don't eat. They observe, quietly, hoping someone will trip over a gravy boat and open up a promotion opportunity. And then, there's you, somewhere on the outer edge, watching this whole social Jenga tower teeter and wobble. Just as you're wondering whether someone's going to challenge a duke to a spoon duel, a new distraction arrives. The handkerchief drop. A young comtesse, accidentally, lets her embroidered kerchief fall. It's embroidered with gold thread and smells like violets. A nearby viscount catches it mid-air. Smooth. Too smooth. People are watching now. Was this romantic theater? A social trap? Or simply an excuse to bend over and show off the detailing on her bustle? These are the kind of high-stakes, psychological mind games people played in a world where blinking too long could make or break your family's reputation. Fun fact, some court ladies wore scented wax beads under their wigs, just to maintain a pleasant aura during long social functions. These melted slowly with body heat, releasing hints of lavender or rose, basically the 18th century version of a Glade plug-in. Of course, beneath all this elegance, there's resentment simmering too. Many nobles feel like they're walking a tightrope every single moment. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and they could be banished from court, or worse, ignored. The Sun King's shadow still looms over Versailles. And Louis XV, while a little less theatrical than his predecessor, still knows exactly how to wield the silent weapon of withholding attention. You look around and spot a noble woman trying to force a laugh at a joke she clearly didn't hear. Another fiddles with his wig ribbon because he doesn't know where else to put his hands. You're seeing real nerves, real sweat behind the brocade and powdered dignity. And speaking of sweating, let's not forget the architecture's role in this whole setup. Versailles wasn't exactly designed for airflow. The high ceilings and tightly packed halls trap heat like a golden sauna. Servants occasionally open hidden panels on the walls to let in fresh air, but it barely helps. Summer dinners often devolve into a kind of silent melting contest. One famous anecdote claims a noble once passed out mid-toast and no one noticed for 20 minutes because everyone assumed she was just meditating on a particularly emotional piece of venison. Eventually, as the table resets for the second service, there's a subtle lull. You'd think this would be a time to breathe, but no, it's an opportunity. The savvy nobles take this window to shift positions. Subtly, a new conversation cluster forms. Someone stands up to feign concern for the music while inching closer to a duchess. Another accidentally misplaces their napkin next to a more powerful cousin's plate. It's a ballet of egos. And you? You're caught in the front row of a performance where the stakes are inheritance, reputation, and who gets the freshest oysters. The king, of course, sees all, his gaze wandering calmly across the room as if he's only half paying attention. But make no mistake, he knows exactly who's sitting, who's standing, and who's sweating under their cravat. Nothing escapes royal notice, especially not seating arrangements. And just like that, the trumpets sound again. The next course is about to arrive. Everyone freezes. Back straight, wig adjusted, smile reapplied. Time to pretend you haven't just been emotionally dueling over a wooden stool for the last 45 minutes. A hush falls again, which is impressive considering the room holds enough powdered nobles to staff an opera house. The footmen re-enter like synchronized swans, their silk uniforms pristine, expressions neutral, carrying, what's this? Rosewater pitchers? You blink. Ah yes, it's time for the ritual of the royal hand wash, and you're not ready for how dramatic it is. 2 steps forward comes the Grand Maitre d'Hotel, flanked by 4 attendants. One carries the rosewater, one holds a silver basin, one bears a warm towel, and the 4th, well, he's mostly there to hold the towel guy's dignity, probably. You lean slightly to see better as the procession arrives at the king's side. The water is poured with near reverence from a long-necked golden ewer, steam gently rising, scenting the air with floral hints and status anxiety. The basin catches the trickle. Then the king, who hasn't lifted a finger since the 1720s, offers both hands like a bored Roman statue. The towel appears. Dab, dab. Done. It's a 5-man job for something you do in 12 seconds at a truck stop. Welcome in Versailles. Now, you might think this is just for show, but there's a deeper reason behind the waterworks. Back then, eating with fingers wasn't unusual, especially when dealing with meat on the bone or artfully presented game birds. Even the finest cutlery events had wiggle room for finger dabbling, so hand cleanliness mattered, at least ceremonially. Historians still argue whether the elaborate washing rituals were genuinely about hygiene or more about reinforcing divine cleanliness, a way of saying, my hands are holier than yours, peasant.
Either way, it's soap opera level drama, starring an actual basin.
And here's a quirky tidbit. There were people who trained exclusively in the art of towel presentation.
These guys practice flourishes.
Some of them could snap a linen square into a swan shape mid-air. A few even got famous. Versailles influencers, basically, but for cloth.
After the king's hands are purified, the rest of the table begins mimicking the ritual, though with far less fanfare.
Tiny bowls appear at each place setting.
You watch a marquis carefully dip just 2 fingers, pinky and ring, into his dish like he's trying not to wake a sleeping trout.
A duchess beside him does something more dramatic. Wrists up, gentle shake, then dries on a monogram napkin with the flourish of someone who has never changed her own bedsheets.
Of course, no one talks about the smell war going on underneath all this ritual. See, Versailles was fragrant, sometimes against its will.
While it's true that aristocrats bathed more than peasants, they still operated in an era where full-on plumbing was for the gods. The palace had lavatories, sure, but you wouldn't want to use one unless your immune system was feeling particularly bold.
To combat this, nobles layered perfume like armor. Everyone had their signature scent, and mixing was common. Lemon and clove, rose and musk. One guy, you hear someone whisper, once wore a scent made from crushed amber and beetle shells. Another was rumored to carry a pomander ball filled with mint-soaked horsehair.
As you're inhaling, cautiously, a footman brushes by carrying a tray of linen napkins, all pre-warmed, folded in delicate triangles.
Another servant follows, laying new knives and forks as the table resets for round 2.
This time, the dishes are richer. You spot roasted boar with chestnut glaze, a glistening tureen of hair, and what looks suspiciously like a pastry shaped into a castle.
It's so detailed, you're not sure whether to eat it or apply for residency.
But again, the food must wait, because here comes the king's taste tester. And this man looks like he has seen some things.
His face is blank, professional, but you can tell he sniffed enough funky cheese and fermented fish to have developed a 6th sense for danger. He performs his ritual in silence. Sniff, touch tongue, Dab mouth, nod. It's all clear, for now.
Historians still can't agree how many poisonings were actually thwarted by taste testers. Some think it was mostly symbolic, an insurance policy for appearances. Others believe it worked just enough to justify the risk. Either way, imagine applying for that job.
Hi, I'm extremely expendable and have no food allergies. When do I start?
After the ritual sniff-nod routine, the king finally lifts his fork again.
This time it's duck à l'orange, the real kind, not the soggy, reheated version you get in sad buffets.
This duck has been basted hourly, stuffed with herbs that don't even grow in France anymore, and plated on porcelain so thin it probably whispers when touched. And now, the court follows. 100 forks begin to rise, delicate, rehearsed motions, no clinking, no stabbing. Just the silent, deadly dance of nobility, pretending this is all totally normal. One nobleman across the table stares a little too long at his reflection in the soup spoon. You can see the existential dread wash over him as he remembers his unpaid debts, an emotionally distant father. Then, just like that, he blinks it away and comments on the marvelous paprika blend. You take a mental step back. This whole dinner isn't just a meal, it's a staged symphony. Every movement choreographed, every pause timed, every laugh vetted. You half expect someone to lean in and whisper, "We're actually actors, and this is your royal hazing." A violin begins to play somewhere behind you. It's soft, melancholy, a solo, maybe improvised. You spot the musician, a young man in powdered white, expression blank, eyes locked on his strings like he's playing for the fate of his ancestors. A nearby baron murmurs something about how the music brings out the warmth of the shallots. Sure, why not? Then, without warning, a cough. Sharp, dry, from somewhere behind the seated group. Everyone freezes. Again. You turn your head. A young noble has gone red in the face, handkerchief halfway to his mouth. A servant immediately whisks him out as if by magic. No one speaks of it. Ever again. That's the Versailles rule. Bodily functions equals treason. But back to the table. Dessert spoons are arriving. Wait, dessert already? Oh no. This is just the pre-dessert, known as the entremets, a mid-meal course of small delicacies, savory, sweet, or both. Think fried artichokes in lemon sauce, sugar-dusted tongue of veal, wine-jellied eggs. Yes, wine-jellied eggs. You do your best not to let your face betray your modern sensibilities. But inside, a voice screams. You shake it off. Because somehow, despite everything, you're starting to see the logic here. It's not just about the food. It's about ritual, about keeping boredom and rebellion at bay, with a full stomach and something fancy to look at. If your nobles are too full to stand, they're too full to scheme. And as the servants step forward to collect the used plates, gently, as if cradling babies, you realize that was just the warm-up. The first course is long gone. The air is thickened with perfume, poultry, and barely concealed ambition. And yet somehow, the main event has only just begun. You brace yourself as another silent army of servants emerges from the gilded archways. This time, they're carrying steaming tureens, glazed platters, and dishes so complex you half expect them to sing. The second service has arrived. The king, calm, composed, quietly chewing, gives no overt sign of enthusiasm. But make no mistake, this is the good stuff. Gone are the lighter entrees and delicate spoon-fed soups. Now come the roasted meats, the stuffed game, the dishes meant to test the limits of animal anatomy and kitchen architecture. You scan the offerings. A pheasant baked inside a duck, baked inside a goose. Its juices pooling on a pastry base, carved with edible fleur-de-lis. A veal roast shaped like a lion's head, complete with sugar-glazed eyeballs. And an enormous glazed carp, stretched across a silver tray like its mid-leap, its scales replaced with overlapping truffle slices. Historians still argue whether the sheer excess was ever meant to be eaten, or whether it was simply culinary propaganda, a declaration that French royalty could afford to make fish look majestic and inedible. You're just trying to stay upright. A servant passes you, balancing a dish of artichoke hearts stuffed with foie gras and saffron cream. The smell alone is enough to trigger an out-of-body experience. You briefly consider tackling him. You don't. The dishes continue flowing, placed with mathematical precision. A cardinal at the far end of the table mutters something about the duck not being as we had it last Lent, while a nearby count dabs his lips with a napkin so delicately you'd think he was brushing dust off a Fabergé egg. You notice something strange now. The pacing. The nobles aren't racing through their meals. They're pacing themselves. Because this dinner, it's an endurance test. You can't just dive into course 5 like a rookie. You have to conserve energy, sip water, breathe between bites, and maybe, just maybe, pretend to be full so you can rejoin the action when the quail roulades show up. There's an unspoken hierarchy of digestion at play. One noble chews slowly, eyes closed, pretending to be transported by a dish of cinnamon-glazed hare. Another talks for 5 minutes straight to stall digestion. A few sneak bites to their lapdogs, who've been hidden under silk tablecloths like furry contraband. Yes, nobles often brought their dogs to dinner. Not just as fashion statements, but as tiny, living napkins, heat pads, or secret food disposal systems. One prince's pug reportedly dined on better food than half the provincial clergy. And you're starting to see why. Because not every dish is a hit. Take, for instance, the infamous larks on toast dish you just witnessed being served. It's exactly what it sounds like. Tiny roasted birds, stacked like fragile ornaments on golden buttered bread.
The guest who receives it claps once, too enthusiastically, and then pretends not to notice the entire beak sticking out of his slice. You mentally file that under things I never wanted to see up close. Let's pause for a second to appreciate the cutlery chaos going on. Every dish demands a new utensil, and no one reuses. You watch a servant replace a sauce fork with a sweetmeat pick. There's a grape knife, a marrow spoon, a truffle chisel, and something called a game skewer that looks suspiciously like a weapon. The king, of course, doesn't touch a single utensil unless it's been warmed, polished, and presented by someone with a title long enough to require a comma. Nearby, 2 dukes are deep in whispered conversation. Something about the price of saffron skyrocketing due to a poor harvest in Valencia. The economy of flavor, you realize, is always lurking beneath the surface. Each course is not just about pleasure, it's also a flex. A noble with Spanish olives on his plate is saying, "I have connections in the Mediterranean." A dish with cinnamon-dusted roast dates says, "My cousin married into trade with North Africa." And anything featuring pineapple? That's a straight-up power move. Pineapples were so rare, you'd sooner see one carved from ivory than fresh on your plate. One fringe tidbit you overhear. There's a rumor that the king once commissioned a dish made entirely of edible gold leaf, wrapped over almond paste filled with honeyed quail, and presented inside a sugar sculpture of Hercules holding up France. It was never served, just displayed. For morale. You glance toward Louis XV now. He's spearing a delicate cut of lamb and lifting it with such precise grace it feels choreographed. It likely is. He doesn't talk much during meals, but his silences are a language all their own. People watch him for signs. Does he pause, smile, request seconds? Even his burps, when they happen, are interpreted like celestial omens. To your left, a minor noble's monocle falls into his puree. He pretends not to notice, then proceeds to accidentally swap plates with his neighbor under the guise of respectful admiration. The swap is successful. The monocle vanishes. Versailles' secret black market etiquette. Meanwhile, servants continue their ballet. One carries a silver censer filled with herbs to freshen the air, not just for odor control, but also to ward off miasma. Science wasn't exactly thriving, but smell-based medical theory, alive and well. They believed bad air caused everything from indigestion to melancholy. So burning dried sage, lavender, and rosemary between courses wasn't just aesthetic, it was healthcare. Sort of. By now, the music has shifted again. A small trio near the doors has switched from harpsichord to flute and viola. The tempo is slow, like a lullaby written.
People dab lips, shift in seats, loosen corsets discreetly. Everyone is, finally, starting to feel it. The weight. The slow creeping fullness. The looming question, how much longer can I do this? And just when you think it might be time for dessert, a servant wheels in something covered in a dome the size of a small sheep. You hold your breath. The dome lifts, and beneath it, glowing gently from 1,000 tiny candied fruits, is a roasted peacock. Tail feathers fanned, head gilded, beak open in an eternal scream. It's not for eating. Not really. It's there to remind everyone that Versailles is ridiculous, beautiful, and slightly unhinged. The king nods once, someone claps politely. You exhale. Dinner continues. The roasted peacock, gilded beak and all, sits like a deity at the table center. No one touches it. That's not the point. It's a statement bird, not a supper bird. A message wrapped in feathers. We are so powerful, we don't even need this extravagance. But here it is anyway. And now things get stranger. The next course slides in under the radar. Stews, ragouts, and mysterious bubbling concoctions. This is where the kitchen's alchemists truly flex. Gone are the showstoppers. Now it's about subtlety, intensity, weird colonial imports. You catch a whiff of cinnamon over something meaty, a hint of lime leaf, and something you can't quite place. It smells like sweet smoke and old paper. The man beside you identifies it, half proudly, as nutmeg from Banda Island. You nod like that means something to you. This is where things take a global turn. 18th century France, despite all its powdered pride, was a greedy sponge for foreign goods. And that included food. The stews here are soaked with colonial flavors. Tamarind, cloves, chili, cardamom, and saffron. All of it very expensive. Some of it stolen. Some of it mythologized beyond recognition. The king dips a spoon into a rich brown sauce, slow-cooked lamb spiced with piment d'Espelette, a chili from the Basque region. He nods faintly. It's good. Everyone else now pretends theirs is also excellent, even if it tastes like spicy shoe polish. One thing's for sure, you wouldn't want to be a picky eater here. Historians still argue whether Louis XV genuinely liked all this exotic fare, or simply tolerated it for political show. What we do know? He was fascinated by new ingredients. He once had an entire pineapple greenhouse built, just to prove he could grow tropical fruit in French soil. Yes, Versailles had a pineapple budget. Speaking of which, guess what shows up next? A plate of pineapple slices, arranged into a spiral. With sprig. You, of course, do not even look at it too long, lest you give away your commoner blood. You shift your weight. Your feet are numb, your ribs feel tight. You haven't eaten a bite, but somehow, you're psychologically full. And yet, the dishes keep arriving. Now comes a fricassee of snails, lightly simmered in garlic cream. Then salmon with orange blossom glaze. Then porcupine-shaped dumplings, their edges crisped into little spikes. Wait, porcupine? No, just pork. Relax. It's a joke dish, shaped like a porcupine, stuffed with spiced meat, painted with squid ink for drama. One of the nobles explains that the king loves visual puns. Once, a dish of frog's legs was shaped into an actual lily pad scene. Another time,
A cake was sculpted to resemble a sleeping lion, which was sliced in half mid-toast. Let's not forget the dining entertainment woven into this entire event. Every few minutes, something happens. A violinist wanders the room, a poet stands and delivers a short sonnet about how love is like custard. At one point, an actor in Roman garb appears and performs 3 lines from a Molière comedy, then bows and vanishes again like a food-themed ghost. It's not just a dinner. It's a rolling, open mic night for aristocracy, and the theme is, "Look how cultured I am," while holding a fork. And if you think this sounds exhausting, you're correct. One lady in coral pink appears to be nodding off mid-bite. A discreet servant adjusts her posture from behind, preventing a faceplant into her stew. Another guest begins humming along to the chamber quartet. A viscount 2 seats away is counting how many almonds he can fit into his napkin folds without being noticed. He's at 9. You're impressed. Let's hit today's fringe fact. Among the king's more obscure habits was his occasional request for invisible soup. This was a broth so clear, so perfectly strained, it looked like warm water, made only with veal bones, egg whites, and, according to one record, the vapor of 3 herbs waved near the pot but not added to it. Why? No one knows. Maybe it was a health tonic. Maybe he was trolling the chefs. But they made it and served it with reverence. The political weight behind every bite is still sinking in. Here, what you're served reflects who you are. Are you trusted with the rare saffron rice? You must be well connected. Did your plate get the carved fig centerpiece? Someone likes you. Were you offered only the boiled potatoes? Yikes. Might want to check if your cousin insulted someone again. Every bite is a metric of status. Even the timing of when you're served carries meaning. Get your dish first? You're in favor. Get it last? You're being punished. Get skipped entirely? You're probably on your way out, socially, politically, or both. And still, Louis XV chews on calmly. A kind of power move in itself, because finishing a meal, that's for hungry people. But just as the room begins to sag under the weight of sauces and self-importance, a commotion. A silver spoon clatters to the ground. All eyes snap toward the sound. A minor noble, a young man in too tight breeches, has dropped his utensil mid-reach. Silence. The king looks up, and then, graciously, waves his hand. A servant replaces the spoon, the noble bows, the crisis passes. But the message lingers. Everything here matters, even the fall of a single spoon. You check the time. No clock, just the wax level of the candles slowly melting down, like calorie counters made of flame. You're deep into the meal now, deep into the heart of a system where food is diplomacy, dinner is theater, and every quail breast carries a message. And just when you think it might finally slow down, someone whispers, "They're bringing out the tongue pie." You weren't hallucinating. The phrase tongue pie was real. Whispered by a courtier in powdered blue, his face a mix of anticipation and mild fear, like someone about to confess something to a priest and an executioner. From the far doors, a team of servers marches forth, carrying what appears to be a large, steaming, golden brown pie. Decorative crust spirals outward like a sunburst, and little vents on the top release puffs of savory-smelling steam. It's a showstopper, a statement, a pastry-wrapped power move. The tongue pie arrives in front of the king first, naturally. It's sliced with ceremonial knives, not regular knives, ceremonial ones, with ivory handles and tiny lion heads. And yes, inside the crust, tongues. Several. Calf tongue, duck tongue, even reportedly flamingo tongue, which makes you wonder what poor kitchen intern had to chase down a flamingo for dinner prep. This dish isn't just bizarre for the sake of it. Tongues were a delicacy, chewy, rich, full of status. If you were eating a creature's voice box, the logic went, you were silencing the animal itself, asserting dominion, consumption as conquest. Historians still argue whether this symbolic layer was truly understood by the diners or just a byproduct of generations of weirdly theatrical eating. Either way, you now live in a world where flamingo tongue pie exists, and there's no going back. What happens next is even more impressive. While the nobles begin to politely dissect their slices, a wave of polished conversation flows around the table like wine. This is the part of the meal where you must be able to talk while eating, without looking like a farm animal. It's a skill, a learned behavior. Some have mastered it, chewing on the inside of the mouth while letting the outside deliver witty barbs and charming flattery. Others, not so much. You watch a marquis attempt to praise the king's new hunting estate, while also biting into a particularly stubborn piece of venison. His sentence breaks into awkward pauses, his eyes water, and his voice warbles halfway between, "Your Majesty's lands are glorious." His conversation partner pretends not to notice. That's etiquette, baby. Others are doing better. One noblewoman is telling a story about an Italian court's scandalous melon incident, complete with hand gestures and perfect comedic timing. Another is weaving gossip about a duchess's runaway hairdresser into a surprisingly touching metaphor about loyalty. It's all part of Versailles' unwritten rule. Your mouth must be as elegant as your outfit. And since there were no phones, no screens, and no memes, dinner conversation had to work overtime. Everyone here is both an actor and an audience, clapping between bites and pretending to be effortlessly charming while secretly plotting alliances. And you, dear listener, you're watching this spectacle like someone stuck halfway through a particularly luxurious hostage situation.
Now, in the middle of this chatter and chewing, a man, 2 seats from the king, leans forward to whisper something.
The table subtly quiets. Everyone listens. He's telling a joke. The high-risk, high-reward gamble of dinner table hierarchy. He delivers the punchline with a modest smile. The king blinks, then, thankfully, lets out a low chuckle. And just like that, the man relaxes. He will live another day. Let's take a moment for today's mainstream historical fact. Louis XV loved food. Not in the, let me critique this sauce kind of way, but in the, I want to know what's in it, where it came from, and how it was made way. He had conversations with chefs. He took walks in his kitchen gardens. He even once helped prepare a dish himself. Not that anyone was brave enough to tell him he added too much time. Which brings us to the servants again. You might think they're invisible, part of the scenery, but don't be fooled. Every one of them is watching, observing facial expressions, posture, hand gestures. They can tell if a dish is liked by the subtle twitch of a nostril. One servant is rumored to have memorized every guest's chewing speed, adjusting portions accordingly. It's creepy. It's impressive. It's Versailles. One fringe tidbit whispered near you. There's a rumor that the pie crusts aren't always edible. Sometimes they're made with plaster or reinforced flour just to hold shape. Guests slice in, eat the contents, and leave the crust like a decorative corpse. Wasteful? Yes, but it's about aesthetics, not hunger. The musical backdrop changes again. A quartet plays something light and bouncy, possibly Vivaldi, possibly just someone riffing confidently. You never really know at Versailles. It's all confidence, powdered and perfumed. And then, amid the rising music and clinking cutlery, the performers arrive. Yes, dinner theater. 3 men and 2 women in Commedia dell'arte masks skip in from a side chamber, twirling and tossing fake fruit, performing a brief sketch where jealousy leads to pudding theft. There's miming, there's a mock sword fight using baguettes. It ends with a poetic toast to the man who eats slowly and speaks sweetly. The crowd claps, delicately. One noble dabs a tear from laughter. Another just shrugs. He's seen better. This isn't unusual. Louis XV loved entertainment woven into meals. Sometimes it was music, sometimes theater, sometimes live animals. A particularly infamous dinner featured swans gliding across a mirrored basin between courses. They pooped. The experiment was not repeated. You lean slightly, trying to stay awake. The flicker of candlelight, the hum of harpsichord, and the low murmur of people pretending to care about stuffed mushrooms.
A preventative measure. Versailles is all about managing human frailty with maximum discretion. Then comes the palate reset course, small plates with pickled radish, sour cherries, lemon rind and vinegar, and, oddly, tiny mint leaf sandwiches.
Meant to wake you up, clear your taste buds, and signal that more is coming. You overhear someone mutter, "Only 15 more dishes." You cannot tell if they're joking. But you're in deep now, and so is everyone else. This isn't about appetite anymore. It's about commitment. It's about making it to the final bite without collapsing or offending anyone's gravy pride. The king lifts another forkful. You follow his gaze, and that's when you realize the next course includes something flaming. Because, yes, things are about to get flambéed.
There's a moment of hushed anticipation, like everyone collectively senses a change in the air. The candles flicker a little harder. A few nobles sit up straighter. One old duke leans forward and whispers to his neighbor, "Ah, the fire's coming." You feel it before you see it. A surge of heat, a tiny whoosh of blue-orange light, and then, there it is. Flames, licking the rim of a silver pan, dancing politely over a mound of something sugary and sculpted. A flaming dish, carried in by a pair of extremely serious-looking footmen who walk like they're handling volatile treasure. The room holds its breath. Yes, it's time for tableside flambe, 18th century style. Tonight's pyrotechnic offering? A baume glacé flambé au rhum, a frozen dome of molded cream, wrapped in meringue, doused in rum, and then literally set on fire. The fire chars the outer layer, leaving the ice cream inside cool and untouched, like dessert got dressed in dragon's breath. And the best part? It's not even dessert. Not technically. It's just the drama before the sweets. Because of course it is. You track the movement of the flames as they zigzag across the table, lighting up powdered faces and glinting offerings the size of plums. The servants extinguish the blaze with silver lids, poof. One by one, each guest gets a slice. And those who don't? Well, they laugh like they didn't want it anyway. They did. The king gets his slice last, but that's deliberate. Everyone's supposed to watch him take the first bite, which he does, carefully, like someone performing a sacred rite. His spoon clinks softly against the plate, then disappears into the golden crust. He tastes. He pauses. Then, just the faintest smile. And suddenly relief spreads like butter across the room. People laugh. They sip. They resume eating with slightly more gusto. The tension, the strain of etiquette, hunger, and social jousting, loosens by a thread. Even the string quartet eases into a more playful tune. A minuet, you think. Something with a wink. This mid-meal theater is the intermission. A necessary breather built into the fabric of these marathon banquets. A reset. A reset with sugar and flames. You shift on your aching feet, adjusting your stance just enough to avoid losing circulation in your toes. The woman beside you, some baroness with 3 ostrich feathers sticking out of her hair, offers a faint nod as if to say, "Yes, peasant, you may lean." Around you, guests begin chatting again, softly, lazily. No politics for now. No veiled insults, just nonsense and small talk. You catch snippets. I do believe that flaming pudding singed the marechal's eyebrow. The harpsichordist is rather good tonight. What's his lineage? I'm still recovering from the duck tongues, if I'm honest. Even in leisure, there are rules.
You might be wondering, how long is this going to last? The answer? Until it's over. There is no fixed clock. Versailles dinner is like a religious ceremony. You don't ask when it ends. You simply hope you're not the one who passes out first. A few brave nobles excuse themselves. Technically, you can leave, but if you go too early, it looks like weakness. Stay too long, and you risk being remembered as That guy who nodded off into his brandy. There's a sweet spot, and you are nowhere near it yet. Let's take a second to appreciate a mainstream historical fact. This entire spectacle was possible only because of the ridiculous scale of Versailles' kitchen staff. We're talking over 200 cooks, 100 scullions, specialists for pastry, sauce, meat, and wine, and even a few servants whose sole task was managing the royal toothpicks. Yes, there were designated toothpick officers. Their entire job was to ensure that tiny gold and ivory picks were available, polished, and, ideally, not accidentally reused. They often were. The kitchen hierarchy was a world unto itself. Apprentices trained for years just to prep vegetables. Sauce makers were minor celebrities. The head chef, the premier officier de bouche, was more powerful than some dukes. And then there's the weird stuff, like the secret spice rooms, guarded like treasure vaults. Saffron, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg were all locked away in climate-controlled cabinets, not for preservation, but to prevent theft by nobles, who were known to pocket a pinch or two for their own kitchens, or to sell on the side. True story. One noble family was caught smuggling nutmeg in their poodle's fur. Versailles-level problems. As the flames die down and the buzz of sugar takes hold, a short play begins on a makeshift platform just behind the table. It's about a foolish noble who doesn't know the difference between bechamel and hollandaise. It's funny in that we're all better than him, ha-ha way, that courts love. Everyone laughs politely, and just like that, it's over. The actors bow, the quartet strikes up a closing phrase, and the next course begins to arrive, just as the charred meringue is cleared. This one's lighter, but not by much. Quail eggs with saffron foam, chestnut custard, miniature turnip cakes stacked like playing cards. You know, just a little something to get you ready for the main desserts. A servant offers a glass of cordial. You take it, in your imagination. It's sweet, herbal, and tastes like someone tried to ferment a flower arrangement. Very French. Very Versailles. Here's today's quirky fact. Louis XV had a brief obsession with coffee served in hollowed-out fruit rinds. He reportedly enjoyed sipping hot mocha out of an orange skin, claiming it enhanced the aroma. Some courtiers copied him. Some just nodded and quietly ordered theirs in porcelain. Versailles' trend-following could only go so far. And now the desserts approach. But they're not just sweets, they're architectural feats.
As the first one enters, you squint. Is that a life-sized sugar swan? Yes. Yes, it is. The sugar swan glides in on a wheeled tray like it owns the room. Its wings are spread in mid-flap, tail feathers curved with mathematical precision, and its beak, carved from rock candy, glistens with what can only be described as smugness. This is not dessert. This is a miracle of ego and glucose. A ripple of admiration moves through the room, not unlike the polite reaction to a minor comet sighting. Even the king leans forward slightly, which for him is the equivalent of a full standing ovation. Welcome to dessert at Versailles, where every sweet course doubles as a flex, a sculpture, and a diplomatic tool. And the swan? Just the first act. The swan's chest opens, yes, opens, to reveal a hollow cavity filled with rosewater macarons, violet jellies, and spun sugar roses so delicate they dissolve if you breathe too hard. One noble dares to reach in for a candy pear, his fingers trembling slightly, like he's trying to defuse a sticky bomb. This is when things go from theatrical to straight-up fantastical. You blink, and now there's a tower of meringue shaped like the Bastille, awkward, a parfait pyramid stacked so high it leans slightly left like a lazy drunkard, and what appears to be a marzipan recreation of the Roman Forum, complete with tiny gladiators made of licorice, and yet no one bats an eye, because this is normal. If dessert doesn't make at least 3 people gasp and 1 person faint, did you even eat at Versailles? But here's the kicker. Most of this isn't eaten. Historians still debate whether the edible sculptures were meant for consumption or just artistic one-upmanship. Many nobles would take a single bite, make an impressed sound like, then push the dish aside to preserve their dignity and their corset laces. Some desserts were even removed intact and sent home with guests as souvenirs, or stored in family archives like trophies from a sugar war.
You eye a candied lemon peacock next to a bowl of pistachio-scented clouds, a poetic term for what is essentially air-flavored marshmallow fluff. Across the table, a gentleman stares deeply into a dish of rose custard as if it holds answers to childhood trauma. Someone to your left mutters, "Ah, the confections diplomatiques," which, yes, were a thing. Here's today's mainstream fact. The French court often used dessert as a subtle form of alliance signaling. A diplomat from Austria? Maybe they'd coincidentally serve Viennese chocolate pastries. Courting trade with Persia? Expect saffron-laced honey cakes. And God forbid you got a lemon tart when your political rivals got spun sugar violets. That was basically war. And of course, there was always the secret menu. Yep. Certain nobles, those with... One lady was once served a cake shaped like her family crest. It had layers of vanilla, shame, and passive aggression. You shift again. Your calves ache, your back is sending signals, but the show keeps going. Now comes the liqueurs course. Tiny crystal glasses filled with amber and green and pink liquids, each more fragrant than the last. You're offered a sip, again in spirit. And the flavor is overwhelming. Like perfume got emotional and decided to become a drink. Orange blossom, anise, clove-infused cherry. Some are smooth, some are fire in a bottle. One tastes like a romantic accident between a flower and a pharmacist. Fun fringe tidbit, one of Louis XV's personal favorites was a bizarre concoction called Eau de Mélisse de Carme, a lemon balm-based liqueur with hints of angelica and coriander, originally made by monks to calm spiritual distress. Naturally, it became a party essential. And now, the cheese arrives. Yes, cheese. You'd think we were done, but no. This is the soft, stinky finale. Wheels of brie, towers of Roquefort, goat cheese marbled with ash. One even has a tiny flag in it shaped like a fleur-de-lis. This is France. Cheese is not optional. It's a spiritual necessity. You inhale a hit of ripe camembert from across the room. It's strong enough to reset your circadian rhythm. But there's a rhythm to it. Each cheese is passed around, people cut dainty slices, bread appears, warm, seeded, crusty, paired with honey, figs, walnuts. And finally, silence descends. Not boredom, not exhaustion, contentment. Even the most cutthroat courtiers soften slightly. This is the Versailles equivalent of slipping into sweatpants. The musicians play a gentle, lulling air. The lights seem dimmer. Even the sugar swan's expression has mellowed from proud to slightly sleepy. Here's your quirky closer for the section. There was a brief moment in Versailles dining history when dessert menus were written as poems. Guests would receive parchment scrolls with rhyming couplets like, "Of cherries plucked in dawn's first light, we've whipped them soft and chilled them right." It was corny, it was pretentious, and naturally everyone copied it. You close your eyes briefly. Not because you're tired, okay, yes, partly, but because the scent of vanilla and cheese and history has become oddly comforting. The air buzzes with sweetness and spent ambition. You've made it through the sugar gauntlet. But it's not over yet. Because somewhere in the background, you hear the rattle of something heavy. They're bringing in the digestifs. The sound is subtle at first. A soft clinking, the muted thump of crystal decanters being set onto linen-draped side tables. Then, through the sugary haze, the servants appear again. This time, they're not carrying platters or pies, they're wielding bottles. Tall, ornate, intimidatingly sealed bottles filled with liquids in deep jewel tones. It's time for digestifs. This is the last stretch of the meal, the post-dessert, post-cheese, post-flaming swan cool-down phase. You know, the part where most people would be horizontal with their waistbands undone. But here at Versailles, that just means it's time to introduce cognac, eau de vie, chartreuse, and even stranger concoctions with names like Elixir of the Lilies and the Archbishop's Cough. A footman offers the king a tulip-shaped glass filled with a glowing amber spirit. Louis XV swirls it, sniffs it delicately, and takes the faintest sip. He doesn't flinch. That's how you know it's strong enough to peel paint. Around the table, nobles follow suit, some sipping politely, others taking slightly larger mouthfuls, like they're trying to forget that they've eaten enough food to destabilize a small country. Digestifs, by the way, are not for everyone. These aren't fruity cocktails or sweet sips. They're sharp, fiery, and often taste like someone distilled the concept of bitterness and mixed it with crushed flowers, old manuscripts, and a hint of rage. One baroness puckers visibly after her first sip of eau de noix, a walnut liqueur aged in barrels once used for vinegar. She laughs politely, then sets it down like it's a live grenade. Her neighbor, unfazed, requests a second pour. You're watching people pretend they're not dizzy. You're also watching the final power moves. This stage of the meal is when the social climbers make their last plays. Subtle flattery, well-placed compliments, maybe even a request for a hunting invitation. It's like closing arguments at a trial, but everyone's slightly tipsy and covered in powdered sugar. And yes, mistakes happen here. This is the moment of the classic mid-feast mishap. A noble rises to bow too deeply and knocks over a glass of raspberry liqueur. It spills like royal blood across the embroidered tablecloth. Gasps. Silence. The man freezes somewhere between apology and cardiac arrest. A servant rushes in. The table resets in under 30 seconds. The king doesn't even blink. But the noble will feel that stain in his soul for weeks. He'll probably write poetry about it. You've noticed something else too. As the room fills with fumes of sugar, alcohol, and candle smoke, the performances get weirder. A man in green velvet recites a short fable about a goose that thinks it's a man. Everyone claps. A woman in a powdered wig shaped like a ship softly sings a folk lullaby from the Loire Valley. Someone giggles inappropriately. Someone else tears up. It's the digestif phase. Anything goes.
Let's pause for your mainstream historical fact. Versailles dinners were often designed to last up to 4 hours, with some stretching longer if the king was in a particularly chatty or melancholic mood. The entire event functioned as a full-body rehearsal of obedience, and food was simply the prop. The longer the meal, the longer people were near the king, and the longer they could bask in, or suffer through, his attention. Everything was strategic, even the length of the toast. And toast, by the way, is happening right now. A noble stands. He's tall, powdered, too confident. He raises his glass of pear brandy and declares, "To His Majesty's ever-glorious digestion." The room laughs, nervously. Because it's funny, until it's not. The king half smiles. The noble exhales. A moment later, another toast follows, this time from a much quieter count, who lifts his plum liqueur and simply says, "To endurance." That gets a louder laugh, because it's real. You feel it too. The soft ache in the feet, the distant buzz in the temples, the constant dance between awe and absurdity. This meal is no longer about food. It's a test of will. And just when the table feels like it might dissolve into drunken fanfare, coffee arrives. Yes, coffee. Tiny porcelain cups on silver trays. The smell slices through the sugar fog like a saber. Bitter, rich, and very exotic, coffee was still something of a novelty here. Brought in from the Ottoman Empire, adopted by the French court, and now the drink of choice for those trying to reset their brains and look alert. You spot a duke discreetly pouring his into his wineglass. A cheat code. You approve. Here's today's fringe tidbit. There was a short-lived Versailles trend where nobles would stir their coffee with vanilla beans instead of spoons, for aroma enhancement. Others went further, using gold-plated cinnamon sticks, which did nothing for flavor but looked fantastic. Several noblewomen wore lockets that doubled as tiny sugar compartments. Fashion, function, sugar smuggling. As the coffee makes its rounds, the mood shifts again. No more posturing, no more fawning, just soft murmurs, chairs pulled back an inch, shoulders finally lowering from their mid-feast tension. You hear a sigh, a real one. This is the beginning of the end. A few nobles begin slowly rising, bowing, excusing themselves under the pretense of needing fresh air or more conversation in the orangery, which is code for, "I'm about to explode and need to walk it off." But others stay. These are the diehards, the career courtiers, the ones who know that the king sometimes drops small favors at the very end,
like breadcrumbs for the socially starved. They sip their chartreuse.
That's the signal. It's over. Almost. Because now comes the most ridiculous part, the post-dinner promenade, where bloated nobles pretend to be graceful and unbothered, while walking in slow circles around the palace gardens or sometimes indoors around the reflecting pool. Think of it as the 18th century equivalent of walking off a food coma, but with an audience. And guess what? You're about to follow them. Because watching 200 overfed aristocrats attempt to glide is comedy gold. But first, the king rises, everyone follows, 100 chairs creak, 100 hearts flutter, and in the background, a servant carefully collects the last, untouched slice of flamingo tongue pie. The king stands, and suddenly, so do you. Or rather, everyone stands, at varying speeds, and with varying degrees of intestinal regret. There's a subtle ripple of motion, like a tide of silk and satin, rising in slow, uncomfortable unison. Welcome to the post-dinner promenade, where everyone pretends they didn't just consume a week's worth of calories while wearing what amounts to historical shapewear. You follow the flow. It moves like molasses in brocade. The noblemen and women spill out of the grand dining chamber and into the Galerie des Glaces, the Hall of Mirrors. You've never seen so much reflection. Literally, the mirrored walls bounce candlelight around like a glitter bomb exploded in a cathedral. You can see your own face a dozen times, and each version of you looks slightly more bloated and socially intimidated. This is Versailles after dinner, digesting in luxury, gossiping in code, walking in pre-choreographed lines, so no one crashes into each other and causes a political incident over a stubbed toe. Let's talk etiquette here. You're not allowed to walk too fast, because that's vulgar, and you certainly can't lean on anything. Chairs are only for those invited to sit, remember? Even walls are a no-no. One lady fainted once, and ruined a tapestry. Never again. As you move through the corridor, you hear the low murmur of voices. Not excited, not bored, just managing. People discuss the weather, the latest operas, someone's scandalous glove color from last week. It's all very neutral. But underneath it, there's maneuvering. Because while the king walks silently a few paces ahead, everyone else is jockeying for after-dinner proximity. Just like with dinner seating, who you walk beside matters. The closer to Louis XV you drift, the more clout you gain. But not too close. That's presumptuous. You have to drift, like you're caught in a gentle breeze of destiny. Not like you're chasing clout, in shoes that pinch. You notice a duchess gracefully happen to turn at just the right moment, so her route intersects with the king's. Smooth. She murmurs something about a recent hunting party. He nods. The king doesn't respond. The marquis flinches. You just witnessed a status faceplant, and it hurt. Historians still argue whether these promenades were designed as part of the social ballet or just necessary digestion rituals. The answer, as usual, both. It gave people time to be seen, to whisper, to plan, all while burning precisely 1.7 calories per lap. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Versailles' layout intentionally funneled power. Even the corridors were designed to filter who could access whom. The further you were from the king's quarters, the further you were from influence. Even walking had political geometry. And now, the king pauses. Just outside the Hall of Mirrors is a small salon, already pre-lit and filled with fragrant air from orange blossom water simmering nearby. He enters. You do not. Because here comes the real separation. Public Versailles versus private Versailles. The public meal is over. The show is done. Now begins the evening rituals of the elite. And you're back behind the velvet rope. But don't worry, there's still plenty to watch. In an adjacent salon, several nobles gather near a card table. It's time for gaming. Not the Fortnite kind,
The 18th century kind, with cards, coins, and reputations on the line. You peer in. Gold coins clink on a velvet-lined table as a noblewoman in a towering powdered wig carefully lays down a hand of Berlan, an early ancestor of poker. She's calm, collected, and definitely bluffing. Her opponent, a viscount with an unfortunate cravat situation, sweats visibly and folds. The room chuckles. Another loss. Another whispered note to his father that he'll need a second allowance. Meanwhile, a servant offers tiny candied fennel seeds to a group watching from the corner. Digestive aids technically, but also just another chance to daintily nibble and judge each other silently. Let's pause for today's quirky tidbit. Some nobles during particularly long evenings would sneak tiny pillows under their clothes so they could lean slightly while standing without technically reclining. It was considered genius. One tailor even made a hidden corset with built-in padding just for post-meal posture support. Versailles was the original home of high-concept fashion hacks. Back in the main corridor, a violinist plays something slow and haunting. It echoes off the marble, reverberating like a lullaby trapped in a crystal. Some guests begin to yawn. Not openly, of course, but in that refined way where they raise a fan or gloved hand just slightly and breathe deeply. A few couples begin to drift into side chambers, murmuring about viewing tapestries or inspecting fountains. It's code for intrigue, flirtation, sometimes scandal. Versailles had eyes and ears everywhere, but also so many curtains. His pace slows near a statue of Apollo, his grandfather's favorite symbol, and you see something rare, a tiny, almost imperceptible yawn. The king is tired, which means everyone is now allowed to feel tired too. Within seconds, a servant is summoned with a fresh silk robe, and the king is gently guided toward his private chambers. And here's where Versailles shifts once more, from a feast hall to a court theater of sleep. Because yes, the king's bedtime was a public ritual too, but that's for later. For now, the guests are dispersing. The promenade breaks into smaller streams. One nobleman clutches his stomach and blames the hazelnut vol au vent. Another quietly removes his wig and fans his scalp like a battle-weary general. You take a breath. Your feet are pulsing. Your mind is swimming in candied almonds and political one-liners. And as the last few nobles drift into the glowing maze of salons, someone taps a glass, softly. A single toast, gentle and unassuming. To the night and the quiet it brings. The clinking fades, so do the lights. The halls are dim now. The polished marble that once gleamed under hundreds of candles has softened to a muted glow, as though even the palace itself has slipped into something more comfortable. You trail behind the final pockets of nobles like a ghost, drifting through this after-dinner hush that hangs over Versailles like a silk veil. But make no mistake, while the grand meal is finished, the night is not over. Because now you're entering the realm of personal tastes, private indulgences, and whispered negotiations behind brocade curtains. Welcome to the post-feast phase, where courtiers unwind, alliances are cemented, and a few very lucky people receive special dishes from the royal kitchens. The secret midnight menu. You overhear it first. A pageboy whispers to a well-dressed lady-in-waiting, "The duke's tray is ready." A moment later, a discreet servant appears with a covered silver dish and a goblet. It's not ostentatious like dinner. This is intimate, quiet, exclusive. Some nobles you see are too important, or too particular, to stop eating when the king does. These aren't leftovers. These are personal orders, special dishes, known only to the recipient and the kitchen staff. Maybe it's a childhood favorite. Maybe it's a dish from their estate. Maybe it's something they can't be seen enjoying at the formal table. Tonight you catch glimpses. A bowl of creamy barley with pickled apples, warm goat cheese on toast, a simple roasted pear drizzled with lavender honey. One woman requests a broth as clear as truth, whatever that means. The chef sends her consommé in a crystal cup. She sips like it's poetry. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The royal kitchens often operated well into the night, producing these personalized meals for high-ranking courtiers and royal favorites. The staff worked in shifts, and specific chefs were assigned to individual noble households, sometimes passed down across generations like trusted family retainers. One chef reportedly cooked only pigeon for 30 years. His hands never touched a fish. This secret supper culture gave nobles something invaluable: privacy. No audience, no stage. Just familiar dishes, familiar servants, familiar power. Exercised behind closed doors. In a world where everything was public, a small plate of cheese with fig jam could feel like rebellion. You notice another noble receiving a covered bowl, which, upon gentle unveiling, reveals something incredibly simple: plain rice with cinnamon milk. He closes his eyes and breathes it in like incense. It's his comfort food. In that moment, this man, who earlier applauded a flaming sugar swan, is just a guy, craving warm carbs and no judgment. Let's jump to your fringe tidbit. There was once a secret list of dishes banned from formal meals because the king found them undignified. Among them, garlic sausage, onions cooked in wine, and, tragically, pickled eggs. But those rules didn't apply after hours. These taboo dishes thrived in the shadows, passed from tray to tray, like edible contraband. Back in the salons, a few conversations continue. A trio of nobles sits near a fire, sipping warm spiced wine and playing a quiet game of questions. An old pastime, where each person poses a philosophical or political dilemma. Tonight's round includes: if you could only save your title or your reputation, which would you choose? Would you dine with your enemy if it meant peace? Is dessert more powerful than prayer? The consensus: yes. Others simply recline. Gently. Finally, one noblewoman has removed her shoes beneath her gown and is massaging her own calves with a candied lemon slice. Another is eating sugared almonds from her purse, like a raccoon in pearls. No one stops her. It's after dinner now. The rules get blurry. A servant offers you, again spiritually, a sip of warm verbena tea. Light, earthy, a digestive herb meant to soothe. It was a favorite of many at court, especially those who knew that while gossip and diplomacy are satisfying, bloating is universal. And just when you think the palace might finally go quiet, a commotion, gentle but unmistakable. The sound of soft running footsteps over marble. You turn. A servant in livery hurries past, followed by another carrying, of all things, a pie in a gilded box. Not just any pie, the king's late-night favorite. Rumors swirl about what's inside. Some say a simple chicken and leek tart. Others, historians still debate how much of Louis XV's dining habits were genuine preference versus performance. Some argue he genuinely loved simplicity, a soft-boiled egg over gold-crusted pheasant. Others say he ate strategically, favoring rustic dishes at night to project humility. The truth is probably somewhere in between. A king with too much of everything, occasionally craving just one thing done perfectly. And maybe that's what this section is about. After all the fire, feathers, and flambé, after the symphonies and soufflés, the palace shifts back into something quieter, something more human. The same people who toasted to power hours ago are now sipping broth, loosening corsets, licking sugar off their fingers in dim candlelight. Versailles never truly sleeps, but it softens. The conversation's slow. A man snores in a nearby armchair, a dog curls beneath a fallen napkin. A silver tray is left unattended, still holding half a fig. And you? You're still standing, quiet now, watching it all fade into murmurs and melted wax. There's just enough silence to hear a line from one final conversation near a window. "You know," someone says, "that flamingo tongue was a bit dry. By now, the palace has exhaled. The perfume has faded to a faint trace. The mirrored halls dim to sleepy gold. The sugar sculptures are gone, eaten, stolen, or quietly slumped into sweet little puddles. You're still here, though, still drifting through the twilight of Versailles, like the last breadcrumb of a feast no one dares admit was too much. And just when you think it's finally bedtime for everyone, someone says, 'Cheese, round two?' You turn, slowly, almost fearfully. Yes, it's real. One corner of the salon has been quietly reset. A few die-hard nobles have gathered near a small table, round, candlelit, dangerously inviting. There's a second cheese course. Because some people just aren't done. This table is unofficial, of course, highly irregular. But at Versailles, irregular is often code for powerful. Only the closest companions of the king, or those with truly heroic digestive systems, would dare keep eating. And here they are, slicing into wheels of brie so ripe they practically walk off the plate, smearing blue cheese onto fig-studded crackers, drizzling honey over chunks of comté like it's a sacrament. One woman dips a candied walnut into her wine and pops it in her mouth with a sigh that could stop wars. Another is just spooning mascarpone straight from the dish like no one's watching. And to be fair, no one is, except you. Let's pause for a mainstream historical fact. France's relationship with cheese goes back centuries. But in the 18th century, cheese was an identity.
Social quicksand. This second cheese course is intimate, almost conspiratorial. These aren't people showing off anymore. They're indulging. You overhear a quiet conversation about a failed engagement, murmured over chev and toasted bread. Another nobleman recounts a dream about swimming in red wine. No one laughs. Someone else just says, "I'd try it." The room feels softer now, less formal, as if the palace itself has changed clothes. And yet, still, the servants move, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with that same eerie efficiency as always. A tea set appears here, a pair of slippers there, a half-full goblet whisked away and replaced by warm chamomile with honey. One noble lifts his arms like a child, and his valet gently slides off his outer coat. That's love, Versailles style. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some nobles, especially the older ones, would secretly bring their own pillows to these late-night salons. Not for sleeping, but to lean on discreetly while pretending to be fully engaged. One was even stitched with the phrase, "Let them talk, I'll nap." It was confiscated. Rebellious softness was a step too far. Across the room, an impromptu duet begins. Not loud, not performative, just two musicians, one on lute, the other on flute, seated on a low couch, weaving melodies like lazy smoke. It's a lullaby for aristocrats. One noble hums along. Someone else taps a ringed finger on their knee in time. This isn't for show. This is after show. And still, the fire burns low in the hearth. The candelabras flicker. A woman tucks her feet beneath her gown and whispers something about marshmallows, which don't exist in their modern form yet, but someone fetches burnt sugar foam anyway. Close enough. You glance out a window. The moon is high now, and the palace gardens beyond stretch out in silvery silence. All those fountains, all those hedges, finally resting. Even the statues look tired. Someone passes with a tray of miniature fruit pastes, tiny squares of pear, quince, and apricot, glistening like stained glass. You feel your stomach say, absolutely not. But your heart says, just one. That's Versailles logic. And then, the strange final transformation begins. The nobles around you, once stiff-backed and rehearsed, begin to shed their layers. Not in scandal, but in softness. One removes a hairpin and lets her curls fall. Another kicks off polished shoes and rubs his feet on the rug, like a child who forgot he's wearing silk socks worth more than a servant's salary. A baron lays down, using his folded cloak as a pillow. You catch a glimpse of his face. He looks human, for the first time all evening. Here's your quirky closer for this section. It was rumored that in the deepest hours of night, the king would sometimes ask for a glass of warm milk and honey, the way a village child might. Not wine, not brandy, just milk.
served in a simple hand-thrown cup. Not gold, not porcelain, the kind of humble comfort no royal title can improve upon.
No one dared mention it publicly. But in the kitchen, it was called le lait de minuit, midnight milk. The most secret drink in France. You can almost imagine it now. Louis XV, alone, finally unbuttoned, sipping warm milk while 300 people silently orbit his gravitational pull of power, politics, and puff pastry. And as your eyes drift across the salon, half-sleeping nobles, forgotten biscuits, music drifting like breath, you realize this part of Versailles is more vulnerable than anything that came before. The feast is finished, but the night has one more story to tell. The palace is nearly asleep now. You can feel it in the air, in the softened candlelight, in the subtle way the staff has vanished into shadow. The halls that once roared with the clatter of cutlery and titles are hushed, velvet-draped, and yawning into silence. But not quite. Not yet. Because deep within the royal apartments, another ritual is unfolding. The king's coucher, his bedtime ceremony. And like everything else at Versailles, it's less about rest and more about ritualized control dressed up as luxury. Louis XV doesn't simply yawn and call it a night. No, he must be put to bed. With witnesses. You find yourself just outside the Petite Galerie, peeking through a gilded doorway as the final phase of the day begins. First, the king re-enters, now dressed in a long embroidered robe, soft slippers, and a high lace nightcap that somehow still screams absolute monarchy. Around him, a hand-selected group of nobles waits quietly, carefully chosen for this intimate moment, to witness the king transition from daylight god to slightly sleepy god. He nods, and the first attendant steps forward to remove the sash. Then another, to present the linen shirt, already warmed over a bed of coals. Another to pull back the sheets, which have been scented with lavender and lightly pressed with iron rods so the folds fall just so. Even his pillow has a designated fluffer. This is bedtime by bureaucratic ballet. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The coucher was one of several daily ceremonies that allowed nobles to access the king in scheduled moments. Morning rising, lever. Evening retiring, coucher. And everything in between. These rituals created gateways to favor. A well-timed comment while the king changes into silk could win your family a vineyard. A misplaced compliment during sock removal, social death. And so, while Louis XV prepares to sleep, the nobles take their final stabs at visibility. You hear one murmur. Your Majesty's complexion glows even by candlelight. Smooth. Another offers a sealed envelope, probably a letter of petition disguised as casual bedtime correspondence. Classic. The king gives little reaction. He is tired, but not unaware. Even drowsy, he's fluent in court code. A servant brings a final. This is the Versailles version of cozy. He sips. He sighs. The room collectively exhales. But you, watching from the edge of this carefully choreographed scene, realize something important. This isn't just a bedtime routine. It's a message. Even in his nightclothes, the king is never truly off duty. He is watched, revered, commented on, performed for. He is the sun, and everyone else merely orbits, hoping not to drift too far or fly too close. And here's the wild part. He chose this. So did his father. So did his grandfather. Power, in this world, is maintained not through violence, but through visibility. You eat in public, sleep in public, exist in public. Your body becomes national property. And yes, even your digestion is symbolic. You think back to that plate of flamingo tongue, that flaming dessert, that sugar swan, all consumed not in private hunger, but in political theater. And now the curtain finally falls. The king rises once more, steps toward his state bed,
a gilded masterpiece of crimson velvet and towering canopy. He climbs in with deliberate grace, every motion a final, silent command. A servant draws the curtains. Another snuffs the final candles. And just like that, he sleeps. Sort of. Because outside his chamber, the nobles remain for a moment longer, bowing one by one before turning away, retreating into the velvet maze of their own rooms, their own stories, their own soft-bellied secrets. You follow them, quietly, past the midnight hush of marble corridors, past statues that now seem less like gods and more like dozing butlers. The palace feels different now, like it's exhaling, like it, too, is allowed to let its guard down. And just when you think there's nothing left to see, no more food, no more fuss, one last door creaks open. A servant steps out. In his hands, a silver dish with one remaining pastry, a forgotten tart, apricot, slightly overbaked, slightly sad. He doesn't eat it. He just stares at it, for a moment, then smiles, then quietly sets it down on a windowsill, and walks away. You linger behind, alone, surrounded by the distant tick of antique clocks, the whisper of silk slippers, the invisible weight of 1,000 whispered deals, swallowed complaints, and sugared lies. Versailles, at last, is asleep. And even here, after all the ceremony, after all the roasted...
The palace is wrapped in velvet stillness now. No footsteps, no string quartets, just the occasional creak of old beams above your head, and the quiet sigh of tapestries shifting slightly in the breeze. Even the mirrors in the Hall of Mirrors reflect nothing new, only echoes of movement long finished. Versailles has shed its mask for the night. But you're still here, drifting like a feather caught between history and dream. Your legs ache from standing so long, your ears still ring faintly from clinking glasses and laughter that was only sometimes sincere. Your mind, though, it's buzzing. Because everything you've witnessed tonight, every roast, every remark, every fork replaced 3 times, wasn't just excess. It was a language. A perfectly constructed, edible dialect of status, fear, and desire. Take a moment. Look back with me. You saw nobles jostle over chairs like wolves in silk. You watched servants pour rose water over royal fingers like priests anointing a deity. You heard operas mid-meal, jokes slipped between courses, gossip that came frosted and plated with tarragon glaze. You watched a man's entire future hinge on how well he handled a toasted almond. This wasn't dinner. It was a ceremony of control, disguised as duck à l'orange. Now you're standing in the lesser halls, the ones without murals or mirrors. These are the corridors the servants use. They're quieter, simpler, realer. You see a bowl of discarded orange peels on a table, a single slipper abandoned under a bench, a folded napkin someone used as a pillow. And still, this strange Versailles rhythm continues. Somewhere behind a wall, a marmiton, a junior kitchen worker, is cleaning copper pans from dinner, whistling softly. He'll sleep for a few hours, then start again before sunrise. Roast birds with creams, carve fruits into shapes they were never meant to become. You pass another room. Inside, a noble still dressed in dinner finery, curled under a tapestry, snoring lightly with a candied violet stuck to their cheek. Human, even now. Let's close with today's final mainstream historical fact. The daily meals at Versailles weren't just about feeding the king. They were the backbone of court politics. Being seen at these meals, being allowed near them, or even being denied access, it defined careers. Families rose and fell over a misplaced wine goblet or an overcooked pheasant. More alliances were formed over cheese trays than treaties. Here's your last fringe tidbit, too. At one infamous meal, a noble was caught trying to sneak food from the king's personal dish, not because he was hungry, but because he believed eating the king's leftovers would give him divine insight.
It did not. He was promptly reassigned to the outer provinces, also known as where dreams go to die. And now? Now the kitchens are dark, the oven's cool, the table's cleared, but one more ritual remains. The final surrender. Sleep. The nobles, the musicians, the servers, even the king. Each dissolving into pillows, silence, and dreams that probably involve more flaming desserts than a therapist would recommend. You too find your spot, somewhere along the edge of all this grandeur. Maybe leaning against a velvet-draped wall. Maybe curled up in the corner of a quiet antechamber, cradled by the fading scent of wine, wax, and cardamom. You don't need a gold bed. You just need a little quiet. And finally, it comes. Your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts grow slow. The king slumbers, the nobles exhale. The sugar swan is long gone, and you fade with the candlelight. And now, as the final echoes of Versailles' glittering excess melt into the hush of night, let your breath slow. You've walked among velvet shadows, followed candlelit processions, watched kings chew and nobles scheme over poached pears and flaming pudding, but that's all behind you now. The palace is still, the stories are done, and all that remains is the gentle rhythm of rest. Let your body sink, as if you too are being laid gently into a four-poster bed lined with soft linen, your thoughts wrapped in lavender-scented silence. Let your muscles uncoil like ribbon. Let your mind, full of gold leaf and powdered wigs and sugar towers, soften into weightlessness. No more footsteps, no more whispers, no more trying to impress the room with the perfect cheese-related anecdote. Just stillness, warmth, and rest. Even in a place built to never sleep, even in a world where everything was performance, sleep still came for everyone. For kings, for kitchen boys, for guests standing quietly in the corner. And now, for you. So breathe. Let the moonlight keep watch. Let the halls fade. Let yourself disappear into soft, slow dreaming. The feast is over. The story is told. And you, finally, are full.